are thrilled to have one of Gladney's very own speakers here with us today. His name is Bill Porter, and he is our Director of Post-Adoption and Client Services here at Gladney. Bill is a very engaging and emotional speaker, and I know you guys are going to love listening to him speak today. So without further ado, I'm going to let you take it over from here, Bill.
It's a pleasure to be here today. It's going to be a short training, just an hour here, but it's something that I love to talk about. It's something that has changed my practice, and where we're talking obviously about empathy today. So hopefully this will be enjoyable for you. I know probably some of you guys have been doing this for a long time, but hopefully it'll be something that maybe I can share something new or maybe connect some dots for some people. So we're excited. So let's get started. Before I talk about empathy, I need to go back a little bit. When I was thinking about this training, I'm like, oh, but I got to talk about this first, and I got to talk about this, and then we'll get into empathy. So I just have a couple of concepts that I want to share with you guys ahead of time before we get into the actual skills of empathy, because I think these will help us understand why empathy is so important and also why empathy is so powerful. So I actually love this little, it's a circle of security little picture here of what the secure base looks like for children. When we look at what research talks about, and I'm talking about the research, a lot of where I get my, a lot of our studies come from Dr. Karen Purvis with TBRI, Dr. Bruce Perry. Those are some of the two main people that I sort of been looking at. Obviously, this is from Circle Security, where we're talking about what's called the serve and return, the attachment style. When you look at what research talks about for the ideal world for a child, the ideal world for a child basically is that a child grows up in a home with loving and caring parents. And what this looks like is that a child has his needs met from the moment they're born, has their needs met physically, structurally, like instructional, but also emotional from the moment that they're born and basically moving forward. So anytime the child has a need, the parent is attentive to the need, is there for the child, is providing love, warmth, care. During this whole process, as the parent is providing this love and connection and care and food and changing of diapers and all these things, the brain chemistry of the child is growing. And what's happening is the child is beginning to attach to the parent because the parent is showing up over and over and over again. And so every time the parent shows up, the child who has a need and is in distress, basically the parent shows up, the child goes from being in distress, and then when the parent shows up, the child goes to being calm or satiated or at peace, at rest, because the parent shows up. So they're in turmoil, they're upset, they have poop, they're hungry, all these different needs, they're frustrated, they're scared. And then in the ideal world, the parent shows up, meets those needs, and then the child's in a better state. And that happens over and over and over and over again. And that's the foundation for attachment. Attachment basically means that you've shown up so much in the life of the child that you literally are writing yourself into their neurology. Because imagine if a stranger shows up, if a child's in need and they see you, who you have shown up as a parent over and over and over again, and then they see a stranger, they're gonna look at the stranger and go, I don't know who that person is. That person hasn't shown up for me, but my parents have shown up for me. That person, that guy, that woman has shown up for me over and over and over and over again. We obviously know that not every child gets this, right? That obviously there's neglect, there's abuse, there's things that children don't get. But in the ideal world, they get this security that says when things go south, when I'm in trouble, I know where I can go, and I can go to my parents. And when I run to my parents, the way they're going to receive me is with open arms, and they're going to be there for me. And what happens is during the developmental process of a child, what actually occurs is the safer they feel, then the more they actually like to venture out and explore. And so that's where you get this sort of loop here, where the child feels secure and feels loved and cared for and knows that there's a connection with his parents. And then the child goes out and explores, sees wonderful things, encounters the world, but then suddenly, because of fear, oh, hold on. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, good. Let's do that. I apologize. We're having some technical delays. Okay, here it is. Okay, because of fear, so this is what we call the circle security and the secure base. So the child basically develops this very secure base because of the parents showing up. But then because over time, as they feel secure, they start to venture out into the world. And as they venture out into the world, they experience great things. There's curiosity, they're growing. But then when things go south, they run back to their parents as the safe place to go, as the safe place to say, I'm scared, I'm hurt, I need help, I'm afraid, I'm hungry. And so the process of the ideal world for a child is that this is constantly occurring. The child is getting their needs met. As they get their needs met, they venture out into the world. As they venture out into the world, if they get scared, if they get hurt, if they're afraid, then they come running back to the parent, and the parent with open arms is able to scoop them back up, is able to hold them, provide, I mean, think of a toddler who's like, you know, having a meltdown. You know, what does a parent do? He scoops them up. He's like, okay, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. You know, it could be a scraped knee. It could be there's a dog in the neighborhood they're afraid of. It could be anything. But that's basically the secure base. And so in the ideal world, what we have is this system that says, when you're scared, you run back to your parents. And so I want you to remember this, because we're going to get to a point here where we kind of go back as to why empathy is so important and why it's so powerful. But you have to understand this first. The open arms that say, go and venture out, and then the open arms that say, come back and I got you. And I will be there for you. And the more I'm there for you, we're going to develop this attachment. And I'm going to literally build myself into your neurology. Okay, let me tell you about another system that I also want to share with you before we actually get into empathy. And I call it empathy, but it also could be unconditional positive regard. It's about the ability to build rapport. Like, so this is going to be, I'm going to interchange all these things. Empathy is sort of a big umbrella. You could actually go with specific empathy, what it means in the dictionary, but I'm talking about this connection thing that's going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my hand up, and if you want to participate with me, that would be great. But I'm going to talk about 3 parts of the brain, and I'm going to use my hand as a little diagram for that. So if you want to, go ahead and put your thumb under your fingers, and you can use this with your clients. This is a pretty cool thing. And then you put your fingers over your hand, and then you turn your hand kind of like this. And this is like a little representation of your brain. And so when we think of the brain, let's call it the neurological system, because when we think about the brain, a lot of times we just think of frontal cortex, but there's actually more parts to the neurological system that we need to understand when it comes to distress. So the first part is, this is just the brain stem. This is where all the nerves that go out to the body and basically receive information. This is the part of your body, the part of my body that I'm using right now to raise my hand. The brainstem is really gathers all the information. It's connected to the gut. There's so many neurons in the gut. Really, your gut is actually known as your second brain. And all these neurons bring in all the information to the brain, and it's basically all your senses. It's coming. And then if you look right here, this is kind of the back of the brain. I don't know if you guys can see this. This is kind of how it looks, right? Like my frontal front and the back and the brainstem. And this is sort of the back of the brain, and this is where like a lot of the sensory processing goes into, where a lot of information comes in. But then if you open your hands up, all the information that comes from your body in this process actually goes through what's called the limbic system. And that's like your thumb down here. And the limbic system is made up of your hippocampus, hypothalamus, thalamus. And basically it's basically the part of your brain that manages emotions. It's the part of your brain And also inside there is your amygdala. That's the fourth part of it, is your amygdala that basically manages all emotions. And all information runs through the limbic system first before it ever gets to the frontal cortex. The reason that is your amygdala basically has what's called the fight, flight, or freeze response. Your amygdala is basically the soldier at the gate who's looking to see, are things safe or are they not? So all the information runs through the amygdala to say, is it safe or not? So if I'm driving to work today and I'm, on the highway and all of a sudden a car veers over into my lane, my eyes see it, they send the information to the back of my brain, it's processed, it's sent to my amygdala. And what my amygdala has at its disposal is what we call the file cabinet of experience. And so what the amygdala does is able to open up the file cabinet of experience and say, is this safe or is it not safe? And it's based on all the experiences of my life, not the experiences of other people, just my own. I look at the file cabinet of experience and say, is this safe or is it not? So when a car is veering in my lane, my amygdala says, that's not safe. That has kinetic energy. That car has mass. If it hits me, it's going to create a wreck. And so then my amygdala then sends excitatory neurotransmitters back through my body to my arms and say, you need to swerve. And then I swerve to get out of the way. Now, all of that happened in what we call sort of the reptilian part, the part of the lower parts of my brain, because my frontal cortex, which is the smart part of my brain, was actually never even online during that process. I did all of that without really even thinking about it, because thinking, we sort of consider that the frontal cortex. So we literally do all of that action. And then once I'm safe, then my amygdala says, okay, that car's back in its lane. I'm safe now. I'm in a safe place. And then I basically, what it says is it sends inhibitory neurotransmitters to say, you're safe, Bill, calm down. And then my frontal cortex then comes online and is like, whoa, I almost had an accident, or wow, that was scary, or holy smokes, that car almost hit me. And all that happens so instantaneously, and sometimes, and in most situations, outside of my control. And so those three parts of the brain are really, really, really important to understand when you're talking about empathy. Because if you think that empathy is just some sort of dialectic, just this conversational thing of like, I'm just going to help some people talk through some tough stuff, or something like that, like you're missing the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that there's parts of our brain that are almost, that are so much more automatic, or in some ways out of our control. Obviously, with the limbic system, we're talking about emotions, we're talking about memories, we're talking about almost like visions, ideas, things that are you can't fully explain, because that's frontal cortex stuff. In some ways, if we talk about language is all frontal cortex stuff. The limbic system doesn't function through language. And so empathy is not just a dialectic, I'm going to talk about this and help someone feel better. It's much more complex than that. So when we look at empathy, what we're actually talking about are primarily two sides of the two parts of the brain. Although there's a lot of interventions that affect the brainstem and the body, you have yoga, relaxation techniques, biofeedback, there's a lot of those things. With empathy, we're going to probably focus on the two. And we're going to focus on the limbic system, and we're going to focus on the frontal cortex. And really providing empathetic responses, providing listening skills, providing what we call the art of connection, is really learning how to manage both of these two parts of the neurological system of the brain, and be able to do it in a sort of a symphony with our clients. And we're going to talk about why it's so hard later as I get into the art of it. But before I get into that, I just want to just very simply go back to counseling 101, if you will, and just go over the skills. And literally, these are not complicated. If you have a pen and paper, write them down. There's so much more research you can do, but I'm probably going to go over 5 or 6 skills that if you can learn how to master them, then you begin what actually is the skill of providing empathetic responses, of connecting with your clients. They're not complicated. These skills are shared in every textbook. Hopefully, if you're been through social work or everything, they're very simple skills, but they are really important to practice. So the reason why the skills are important is because the goal of what we're looking for is attunement. We are looking, I'm going to assume that most of us have someone in mind that we're going to use empathy with. And whether it's a client, maybe you're a teacher, maybe it's your kids, maybe it's your spouse. The idea of empathy is that we are going to learn how to attune, almost like a musical instrument of tuning. I'm not musical when it comes to specifically music, but with emotions, it's kind of the same concept. I'm going to attune myself to what is the experience of the person that is sitting across from me. There has to be another person in this picture. I mean, I guess technically you could be empathetic with yourself and you could attune to yourself. And I think that's a very good skill. But in this situation, you're looking at the person across from you and to say, I'm going to attune myself to you. So I've been in this field for, oh man, let's see, it's been probably 23 years. I started as a youth pastor in college. I've been working with at-risk kids for 23 years. And with the first half of my career, I worked as a drug and alcohol counselor. I worked as a probation officer for juveniles for a while. I worked in a college dorm. I was in charge of a whole freshman dorm, and I considered myself to be a really good helper. I thought I was good. I wanted to help people. And so when I decided to get my master's in counseling from UNT, I very, in a sort of narcissistic, prideful way, sort of thought like, what are they really going to teach me? Like, I already know how to help people. I know how to give advice. I know how to, kind of figure out what's best for them. Almost like I was a judge and jury of like, you know what, I think you're not doing your life well, so let me teach you how to do that, right? I think we all go into the field kind of thinking like we want to help people, but really what we kind of want to do is, direct them on what we think they should do. And boy, I was really taken back within my first few classes at UNT, University of North Texas, if anyone's from out of the state, on how horrible of a listener I was. Like, I would literally people would be telling me stuff and I would just be creating judgments and decisions and here's what I think they should do and all this great stuff. And, and what I realized was in my first few classes where they were teaching us what it means to actually go into the well of somebody else, is that this is something where I almost have to turn myself off. That I have to, in a sense, focus on what this other person is going through to really get into their well, the well of both their amygdala and their frontal cortex, to actually be able to understand what they're going through. And so that's the skill, and we're not talking about the art yet, but that's the skill that it requires. So let's talk about frontal cortex stuff. And I'm just going to share some skills here and you guys can write them down and then later you can go into it. But basically, when we're talking about frontal cortex stuff, when people come to us in distress, they kind of look like this little area over here, where they have all these thoughts and things that are driving them crazy and ideas and trying to figure out what to do. Most of the time, people don't come to us when they're in a good state and they have clarity of mind and they can think through stuff. Most of the time we encounter our clients, our children, when we have these moments where empathy is the solution, it's because there's something that's creating chaos in their minds. There's something that's creating challenges. And so much of what empathy is and this art of connection, the first thing is what I call creating clarity. And this is a funny one because this one feels, it doesn't seem like it's very empathetic, right? Like, well, empathy is about emotions, right? Empathy has to do with emotions. And I get that. And I guess technically you could go down that road. But to me, you really can't disconnect the emotion with the thought. They really are sort of cousins here, and they're functioning so well together. In some ways, they're connected, and they're probably more connected than we realize. Some people always start from the front, and they start with the clarity. Other people may start with the emotions, and that's fine. There's actually, I'm going to give you a little bit of ideas on which way you need to start. But when we're talking about creating clarity, the simple skill is called reflection of content. Reflection of content basically is that you start by introducing, like, okay, tell me what's going on. Every therapist, every good counselor knows this. You know, tell me, what would you like to talk about today? Let's talk about how this week went. You know, you have your introductory phrase, and then you begin to listen. And as you listen, you begin to reflect back, which is sort of repeating. It's not parroting. I'm not gonna say exactly what they say, but I'm gonna reflect back in my own skin. Like, I'm not gonna, you know, act like I'm somebody I'm not. Just basically reflect back my understanding of what they're telling me. That's simple. I am reflecting back my understanding of what they're telling me in a way that they feel like they're being heard. So this is like a paraphrasing the client's words, their thoughts on how things are going. So, you know, this was a hard week. I had to go to work. I had to work extra hours this week. You know, I'm having some medical issues. The car broke down. Anything that is just content, information. What I'm doing is I'm just taking the information, and in my mind, I'm processing it. I'm reflecting it back to the client. When I worked at a nonprofit called Lena Pope Home. Before I came to Gladney, I've been at Gladney now for about 8 years. I worked with juveniles on probation. And what I would do is I would go into the home and I would do in-home family counseling for juveniles on probation for Tarrant County. And so literally I would knock on the door and be like, I'm your court-ordered counselor. I'm here to see you. And I did functional family therapy. And so this therapy was family therapy. It was not individual. And so I'd be sitting with anyone who was there in the family, and we would talk about family dynamics, and we talk about how things are going. And obviously probation was a part of it, but really probation usually was the symptom of something else that was going on. And most of these kids had lots of trauma. Most of these kids had lots of losses in their life. And so a lot of these kids, you know, financial issues, economic stress created some of their issues. And so, you know, but we would just spend time getting to know the family. And I remember as a therapist, I would literally get out a piece of paper, because when you're doing family therapy and you have content coming from all different people. You have the mom saying one thing, you have my client, you have a sibling, you have the dad who's kind of acting like he doesn't care about this, but he's listening, and they're sharing all this information. And all you're trying to do is just literally get all this content, because this is the thing that if I can reflect back to them accurately, they're going to feel like I heard them, and I'm going to develop rapport with them, because they're going to say, that guy actually understands what we're saying, what we're going through. And so I would create, I mean, this is where, you know, you think you're always forced to make your genograms in school. Like, I'm doing genograms, but they're like funky bill genograms. And I'm doing timelines like, okay, so this person passed away here. And okay, and there was a divorce here. Okay, and then what? Oh, your father who divorced your mom moved to where? And I'm drawing pictures, and I'm getting all this stuff out. And it usually takes a few sessions, right, to fully understand this. And then I sit there and I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at all this in a world, you know, all this information that I've gathered. And then I go, okay, so let me get this straight. And then I proceed to basically reflect, rephrase, share back all the content that they just shared with me. And what I'm actually doing is I'm helping out the frontal cortex. I'm literally creating connections. You would be amazed. I mean, it happened almost every single time. They say, oh my gosh, I never realized that. I never saw that. Oh, I never connected that. I didn't realize that after that happened, we moved 3 times. Remember, we're not even getting to the emotional stuff. We're just talking about like the logistics of life. And they're like, oh, I moved 3 times. And what happens is they begin to make connections in their frontal cortex of, yeah, that's right. we moved 3 times. My father did die. And then, then he got on probation. I never realized that he got on probation right after my father died. And he had such a strong relationship with my father because his father, after he divorced us, moved. Holy smokes, that's so fascinating. Insight, like that's all insight, right? Like all I'm doing is taking, and it's amazing that so often when I would say these things, they would say, well, wait a minute, how did you figure that out? Why, wait a minute. And I'd say, I didn't say, like, I'm just telling you what you told me. Because I think most people, what we don't realize is most people are going through the day with the thoughts that aren't figured out. They're not clear. And when we create this reflection of content, what we're helping people do is like help them understand their own thoughts, which is fascinating. You think that would be simple, but it sometimes takes somebody else to help reflect those things to know, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that. I never connected those things. So our job is to just get the facts right, get the timeline right, understand the story and the meaning of the client and what they're telling us. We're literally untangling their thoughts. So as I said in the past, this is timelines, genograms, pictures, diagrams. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to organize thoughts. I mean, that's kind of, I'm sorry, I went too far. That's kind of what this process is just organizing all the information to help the frontal cortex understand and comprehend their own story. We never want to add our story to them. We never want to put meaning to things that don't mean anything. We are so good at making things about ourselves. And so sometimes a loss to them may not be a loss to us. One of the things that I always had to deal with in working with probation is, I may have my opinions on, let's say, marijuana use or cigarette smoking for a 16-year-old. But I can't put my judgment on a family who's gone through so many other things that then I tell them how judge, like that's where I can really get myself messed up, because I have to make sure that I'm a vessel that's allowing this information to come through me, but not hit my judgment part, my questioning, especially my shame, like, oh, and then you got a divorce, like that would be devastating. And so when I'm talking about creating clarity, this is literally about creating clarity in a way. This is the skill, is to in a sense, it's not to be robotic because I have to be human, but I have to be able to do this and just say, okay, so you went through this loss, this occurred, you moved, all these different things to help get the facts and the information straight. And that helps create clarity for our clients. It's extremely important, and it's an extremely powerful gift for our clients, especially if they're struggling with their thoughts and what's happening. You're just laying it out there for them. Okay, so before we kind of connect all these dots, let's move into the emotions. And so this is where we talk about the limbic system. Now, this is where most of you guys probably, if you've gone through some training, have already heard about how to manage emotions. Emotions are very, very powerful things. We don't choose our emotions. Some people say you can control them through your frontal cortex, that, if you think certain ways, that your beliefs affect your emotions. That's great. Like, I completely believe that as well. But regardless, most of our clients come to us, our children, the people that we're engaging with, come to us with challenging, hard emotions. This is where basically our job is to reflect feeling. The first one was to reflect content. Content is where we're reflecting information. Reflection of feeling is where now we're doing a little more, I wouldn't say assumptions, but we're doing a little more investigatory process. A lot of times when people are experiencing feelings, they may not be very good at naming their feelings. Feelings we have a lot of different emotions that run through our bodies and through that run through our limbic system. And most of the time, we don't fully recognize what we're going through. It's almost like something happens and then our limbic system, something hits our amygdala, and the amygdala's like, I don't like this. This is not safe, or this is bothering me. And so all of a sudden now we start to have a feeling, jealousy, anger, fear, frustration, whatever it is, we start to experience that. And a lot of times it doesn't reach our frontal cortex to where we give it a name, because the name would be the frontal cortex recognizing the feeling and then naming it. And so most of the time it sits underneath the surface and has power and control over us, but we haven't been able to name it and understand it. And so when we're working with our clients, a lot of it is just naming the feeling. It's listening to what they're saying and identifying the emotion behind what's being communicated. Sometimes they may say, I'm so pissed. And then you can be like, okay, man, this is easy reflection. Wow, you're really upset. You're really angry. Like, you're frustrated. But other times they may say, and then he said this, and then he said that, and then he went and did this. And then you're like, oh, wow, you're feeling overwhelmed. See, they didn't tell me they were overwhelmed. I had to listen to them and say, okay, you're talking about how you just got hit by 3 different things right in a row, and that was overwhelming to you. And so you say, I am going to now label this emotion. I'm going to say, wow, you were overwhelmed. And so in saying I'm overwhelmed, all of a sudden they go, their frontal cortex is like, yes, that's what that was. That was that emotion that I was experiencing. Yes, I'm overwhelmed. Or yes, I'm jealous. I'm jealous because it seems like every time that I want to do something, I get hit with, a roadblock. And yet this person, they get no roadblocks. They just get like the golden path to success. It's frustrating, and I'm jealous of them. And so you're literally creating these names, these identifications of feelings. Now, for those of you who are like me, I'm not naturally gifted at naming feelings. I'm like the dumb counselor who knows like anger, fear, and frustration, right? Some of you guys may be like, you may have like 20 different words you use. But the point is you just need to see the feeling and talk about it with your client and say, wow, that's really scary. That is overwhelming. That's, like I said, I don't even have that big vocabulary. Like, I have my 10 words that I go with, and that's it. But in doing that, what you do is you allow the connection of the frontal cortex with the limbic system to start functioning. And you begin to give that client an experience of, oh my word, you're right. I do feel this way. I do have these feelings. I do have this emotion. What's really cool about this is you can assess the effectiveness of this, because sometimes you'll say, wow, you feel jealous. And they'll say, no, I don't feel jealous, but I do feel inferior. Like they're clarified for it. Like they'll correct you on what feeling they're experiencing. But in creating those feelings, what we're doing is we're helping out the limbic system. We're making sense of the emotion. One of the things that we know is that a lot of our clients are only going to be able, or our children are only going to be able to express anger. But we know that anger is like a secondary emotion, right? Like, anger usually is because something else has happened. A great one for children, if they feel shame, boy, they go to anger. As parents, if we feel embarrassment, boy, all we're going to show is anger at our kids. But what really happened before anger was something else. So what happened before anger that took us to anger? Anger is sort of the fight, flight, or freeze response of, I'm now going to control this, or I'm going to leave. But what happens before anger that we could identify that gets us to the place where we can understand, like, oh, well, you were angry, but what happened before? What emotion did you have? And you'll notice that some people literally have an emotion for just a split second of embarrassment, and then boom, right into anger. And so you think you're dealing with anger, but the truth of the matter is, if you actually spend the time to listen, you'll hear, oh, when your child acted out in front of, your parents, you felt embarrassment. You felt like maybe that meant that you were a bad parent. See, there's your content and feeling. Both. I'm kind of doing both right there. Oh yeah, yeah, I guess I was embarrassed. And then now you've named it. One of the powerful things about emotion is that it's the concept, and people have said this a million times, but I love it, and it's so true, is that if you name it, you tame it. That emotions are really, really powerful things. And if you don't acknowledge them, they have a way of staying around and controlling and managing and almost being like a silent voice in your life without you even recognizing it. But when you name an emotion and you acknowledge it and you say, yes, I feel embarrassed, or I feel scared, or, I do feel overwhelmed. What happens is then that naming it actually becomes part of it, like almost like, oh, I'm accepting it. I accept that I feel this way. And in accepting it, I can now begin to look at it honestly. And now it doesn't have to have this internal control over me that somehow it can manage me without me being knowledgeable about it. Now, like, it's all knowledgeable. Now it's out in the open. Like, now I have an emotion that I need to figure out how to address or how to feel. In some ways, when we talk about empathy, let me tell you what empathy is not. Empathy is not dismissing someone's emotions or saying, oh, it's not that big of a deal. Or, well, that's a weird response to that. Why are you experiencing that? We all have those ineffective tendencies to sort of dismiss emotion or feel uncomfortable with emotion. But the challenge for us is to create such a secure base that our clients, our spouses, our children can experience hard emotions, painful emotions, and that we can, in a sense, create the holding capacity, the containment to say, it's okay. Like, you can feel this with me. I'm not afraid of your jealousy. I'm not afraid of your feelings of being overwhelmed. I'm not afraid of your embarrassment. We can deal with this together. We can even talk about like the feelings of shame. Like, I am safe enough that you can, in a sense, acknowledge these things. And Brene Brown in some of her work says, like, it's not that I'm going to tell you not to feel it. I'm going to help you feel it. Like, I'm going to be there with you when you're feeling it. And that's sort of the concept of empathy, is just helping a person feel, to give them the safe place to have feelings, to express them, to name them, to figure out what they are. This is a very challenging, I always hear from, you never want to open up a can of worms you can't handle. So when you start going down these emotions, you may get some of those things. And so you just have to be honest. This is where, you may get into so much sadness that they could be suicidal. You never know where this is going to go. So you want to make sure that you have your ducks in a row of saying, okay, if at the worst case scenario, I have a suicidal client, once I open up this Pandora's box of emotions, I have to be prepared to get them help. Because the truth of the matter is, you don't know what people are carrying. And so you're inviting them to share with you these emotions. And what you're doing is you're providing that safe place for them to feel.
Bill, we have a question for you real quick.
Sure.
Sergio asked, how can you practice the skill to identify the primary emotion?
So that's part of the attunement process. The primary emotion, boy, that's complicated, because most of the time, I know in my experience, the people who are experiencing the primary emotion a lot of times don't even know they're having the primary emotion. So what I always have done is created in my mind what I think the primary emotion is and present it to the client. It sounds like you're overwhelmed, or it sounds like, you're tired. And then what happens is, usually if you just listen, the client will give you affirmation of, yeah, I'm tired. Or they'll say, oh, Bill, I'm not tired. I'm exhausted. I am so freaking tired of this. It is exhausting to me. And you're like, oh, you're exhausted. So I'm literally letting them clarify to me as we go that this is a little bit of the dance, where I'm going to throw kind of a broad net out there and sort of say, okay, here's what I'm thinking. There's also a lot of times where I will, in my mind, assume, I work in post-adoption. And so people call us here at Gladney when they're frustrated about maybe a process, or when they're having a hard time with their kid. And so I'll listen to them. And sometimes they're frustrated with us. And so I will say, they'll say, and then this happened and this happened. And then the paperwork and whatever, and then I go, oh my gosh, you're really frustrated, or you're really, oh man, you are, you know, you've lost a lot of trust with us because you feel like we didn't do a good job. So I'll pull all of these pieces together to create what I think is the answer, and then in a sense, it's so funny that you asked this, because in a sense, what I do is I present this concept, and then what I have to do is I have to practice silence. What I do is I say, wow, it sounds like you're really mad at us because maybe this process didn't go in the way you thought, or maybe this was harder than you thought it was going to be. And then I get quiet. Because what I've done now is I've literally introduced some things in their mind that maybe they've been dealing with, wrestling with, managing, trying to, there's people who are trying to, in a sense, keep the cap on it, and they don't want to let it out. And I've just given them the invitation to feel. And all of a sudden now, then you start to see the wheels and the emotion and all these things. And sometimes this silence, you know, it could be for 30 seconds or just, you know, and this is where the tears come in, or the rage, or, you know, the acknowledgement, the silence. When you present this thing, here's what you're telling me, here's what you said, here's the timeline you've just shared. As I put all these things together and I share them back to you, then my job is to just be quiet and to let you now, or my client, process that information and think about it and feel. I'm literally inviting them to feel, which is not a verbal thing. Like, when you feel something, it's not words. You know, they'll try to talk their way through it, but like they may cry, they may get tense. You know, this is emotion, this is limbic system stuff. And so they have all those things that they're going through. And I just sit with them. And then as they begin to process through it, and we talk about it, and we feel through it, it's not uncommon for me for me as a counselor to activate my limbic system. Sometimes when they're crying, I cry with them. I've cried with my clients many times. I feel the pain that I don't feel the pain for me. I'm not like, oh, I had that experience too, that reminds me of, no. Like, I'm attuned to them, and I know what pain feels like, and I have to access my limbic system. I do no one any good if I'm doing empathy with my frontal cortex. That's like, it's a part of it because I have to think through these things, but I also have to make myself vulnerable to my client. I feel like if people are jaded, if people are worn out, if people are tired, like, you're not doing your client any good if you're not in a position where you're able to be vulnerable with your client as well. And I'm not saying this is like you make it about yourself. I'm just saying that you are vulnerable emotionally to your client, and to say, wow, it's hard. That's hard. That's hard. Like, I don't even, like, see, I'm struggling with words because I just feel it, like the weight of what you're going through, or the sadness, or the loss. It's not uncommon that, you know, we have to do calls where we have to share information that someone has passed away, you know, and so I share that information and they have to process that. And so I just let them feel over the phone with me. And, you know, it's shocking, or it's sad, or, you know, we have to give them that space to feel. So those are the two main skills. It's nothing new. I'm not recreating anything. You've heard them, but it's reflection of content and reflection of feeling. I want to share, we have a few minutes left. I want to share a few other skills that are really important in this empathy. And then I'm going to circle it all back around to our attachment and why empathy is so powerful. But those are the two main ones, man. It's reflection of content, reflection of feeling, and you're doing both around the same time. Okay, some other things that are really important is what's called bridging words. I remember I had a social worker who she said, I'm not very good at empathy. It's just not something I'm good at. I'm like, listen, I was not good at empathy. I was kind of a narcissistic, I'll tell you what I think you should do type helper. And I had to learn how to be empathetic. So you can learn. And so she would sit with me during my calls where I would have a family who was upset or was struggling. And I'd say, okay, yeah, I understand. Sure. Yeah. understand. I know. Yeah, I understand. I'm sorry. Yeah. Wow. You know, that's tough. And literally I'd go about 30 minutes of just using bridging words and say, okay, sure. And they would literally be rah, rah, talking about all this stuff. And then at the end of the conversation, I'd say, okay, well, if there's something I can do, if you want to look for a counselor, we can help. I appreciate it. You know, I'll definitely note all the things you share with me. You know, I think you're doing a good job. You know, but hang in there. I know that it feels like you're not making any progress, but you are. And then I'd basically get off the phone. And then the young lady who I was working with would be like, you didn't do anything. I'm like, what do you mean I didn't do anything? She goes, all you did is say sure and okay, like for 35 minutes. I'm like, yeah, that's it. Like that's empathy, like saying, okay, I understand. I'm sorry. Yeah, sure, I get it. Or wow, that's tough. I mean, literally these bridging words that allow you to know that I'm listening, I hear what you're saying, and I want you to continue to share the conversation. The bridging words are really, really important. And one thing you have to realize with empathy is whatever your client is going through, like this is not about you agreeing with that. Everyone experiences emotions completely different, and everyone experiences their thought process is completely different. So you could have one situation where someone's going through one thing, and you put the exact same person in that situation, they're going to experience that reality completely different. So when you're talking about empathy, when I say words like sure or okay or of course, I'm not saying I agree with you, because there's no way I could agree with them if you're thinking like Bill the person. Bill the person would be like, oh, that's weird that hit you that way, because that would never hit me. Or, oh, that's funny. That's, you know, like Bill the person is this broken, you know, individual who has like stupid ideas and has, you know, jokes that don't make sense. But Bill the counselor is the person who says like, I'm going to provide you with unconditional positive regard. Like I'm going to give you the space to feel things that even though if they were blurted out into the world, we would all be embarrassed for you, right? Like you're jealous over something that really you should be grateful for, but you feel jealous. So I'm going to give you the space to be jealous. It doesn't matter. I'm not judging you. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not going to say you're wrong. All I'm going to do is acknowledge how you feel. I have to create such a safe space that I say, you can feel whatever you want. And it may be the most inappropriate feelings. I mean, don't get me wrong. If your thoughts were broadcasted to the world, we'd all be, you know, appalled by the thoughts that go through our minds. Like it's all of us. We all have these feelings that are misconstrued and mismanaged, and they don't make sense. And we have thoughts that are crazy and like, oh my gosh, if anyone ever knew I said that, like that's the way it is. But with empathy and these things, we're creating that safe place to say, it's cool. Like I got you. You can share this stuff. I'm not going to judge you. And even if it's things that are scary or even it could be harming, I'm going to walk you through that. Now, obviously, you know, if it's self-harm or harm to others, I'm going to have to address that stuff. But even if we get to that point, like I still want to listen to you. I want to listen to, okay, tell me about what you're talking about here, where you talk about wanting to harm yourself. Like I need to hear what you're saying, and I'm going to do it with no judgment. I can't put judgment on it. The moment I put judgment on it, the process is done. It's over. You're done. You just shamed somebody. You just kind of told them your thoughts on how you think this might not be dumb. Like if you wanna do that, like you can, but the empathy process is over. Like that vulnerability, it's done. Like you have now put a judgment call. Well, that's interesting. You know, that's part of your addiction. You're trying to, you know, and you're like, okay, you just shamed them with addiction, or you shamed them with something else. Don't get me wrong. We all are using empathy to get to a result at the end where we can teach our clients something, we can help them with something. Maybe we have an implementation, you know, maybe you're doing TBRI, maybe you're doing CBT, maybe you're doing, you know, family therapy. And so you have your intervention later, but this first process is just hearing them and feeling where they're at. And that has to be very, very safe for them. That's a secure base that says, I got you. You can tell me whatever it is that's going on, and I'm going to provide a safe base for you and then reflect that to you. Even though I may not agree with it, build a person, that's not who's in this conversation. It's me, the vessel of empathy and love and safety. And that's what I am for you today. Now, we may change that role. If I'm married, I can't do that all the time. But if it's my client, then yeah, I maintain that position as best I can, as long as I can. That's the rapport building process. Okay, before I run out of time, I have a few more. Clarifying questions. These are always very helpful. I always want to get clarifying questions. Are you saying this? Help me understand. Could you clarify this? These are probably more for the content. But the clarifying questions are fine tuning. I get an idea of where a client's at, and then I fine tune it. You'd be amazed how many times what a client presents to me is not the issue. A lot of times they present anger to me about some type of the process or something that's going on. And then I listen and I say, okay, I can understand why that would be frustrating. But the amount of emotion that you're feeling right now seems a lot stronger than this problem. Is there something else going on? And I know that if I've managed the first half of that conversation of being empathetic and reflecting the first half of that conversation where I've gotten their initial complaint correct, then what I find is when I say, is there something else going on or is it just this? Then I know that they trust me enough and I've done it well to then say, well, actually there is. And then they go into the bigger issue. I'm having a marital problem with my husband. We're about to separate. My child has acted out sexually. You know, and then you get to like, oh, this is why you called. This is why we're here. And you begin to, in a sense, expand on what's happening. Most of us, if we go into therapy, we go in because we're having trouble with our significant other. And then all of a sudden we realize like, oh my gosh, this has to do with my relationship with my parents, or this has to do with a traumatic event that occurred. Like most of it is that we think we're doing one thing. And then as we get empathetic responses and we get that opportunity to listen and hear and grow and everything, then we realize like, oh my gosh, this is about something else. And then we begin the process, and the clarifying questions help do that. You have to say, okay, is this it? Or is there something else? You mentioned this, how does that work? Another one is confirmation. When we're done, we say, did I hear you correctly? Is that correct? Like, is this what you're saying? You're saying this. This is what you're expressing. And most of the time you'll hear a yes, or you'll hear a no. And if you hear a no, that's super cool. Just be like, okay, tell me what I missed. Explain it better to me. The confirmation says like, you understand, like, I understand what you're saying. And I think this is what you're telling me. And they'll say yes, or they'll say no. And if they say no, then you just go, okay, what am I missing here? And then you begin the process again. I always love this next skill, which is the summarization. Boy, this one just makes people feel heard. This is where I'm tying the elements together, where I say, here's what I see, like, here's what happened 10 years ago, and here's how that made you feel. And then you were doing fine, and then 5 years ago, this happened, and that seemed to set you off. And it's been challenging ever since. And that messed up this relationship, and that feels like abandonment to you. And so here's kind of where you're at. And I do this a lot in summarization, is to create a little bit of a narrative. When we talk about narrative therapy, a lot of times people have stories in their heads. And a lot of times those stories can be very demeaning, or it can be very shameful. And a lot of times when you lay out people's stories, they're like, oh my gosh, I never realized I've gone through so much in the last 3 years. Or holy smokes, you're right, look at all the changes of job, or the pain I've endured. Or holy smokes, I didn't realize this, but I'm throwing my child into chaos because I keep changing schools on him because of, whatever reason. And I didn't realize that I've been doing all this stuff. The summarization is sort of the, and you can do this in multiple times. You can do it mid conversation. You can do it at the end. But the summarization is a nice stepping ground to, okay, let's talk about what we do next, right? Like, I've just heard you. I feel like I got all the information. So now, do we talk about counseling? Now, do we talk about medication management? Now, do we talk about different interventions, occupational therapists, like, or do we talk about breathing techniques and relaxation? Or do we talk, like, the summarization allows you to know what the specified solution is to what's happening in your client, child, spouse's life. And the thing about it is, if you don't do the empathy and the listening correctly, you will be solving the wrong problem. Like, you have to be good at really hearing what your client, your spouse, your child is saying, so that then when you summarize it, you're like, aha, the solution is this. The intervention is this. If you don't do this well, and all you're doing is taking some, little bits of information, and then you plug it into your computer, excuse me, then the outcome is wrong. Like, you're doing the wrong intervention because you didn't take the time to really hear what's going on. And if you don't do it well, you also may be addressing their first complaint, their first distress, which truly wasn't the real one. And so you can miss, you can basically be ineffective if you don't listen. You can sound like you're being helpful. You may feel like you're being helpful, but you haven't addressed the real issue, the root of it. You're looking at a symptom, or you're looking at maybe something that was secondary. And so the summarization is sort of a process to say, here's what I heard, here's how this works, and then you move into it. So those are simple skills. And if you do it well, what you have is just the miracle of connection. And I will tell you that it is a miracle. For those of us who've experienced true empathetic responses, and people who have truly been there for us in the heat and in the pain, it's so powerful. And then also for those of us who have been given the opportunity to do that for our clients, it also is so powerful. The reason why it's so powerful is because our brains were made to connect. We have what's called social minds. And when we do this thing, this attachment, it literally transforms our neurology. It just brings us online. A brain in isolation is not a healthy brain. It's just not. And so our goal is to connect. I want to share a couple of things real quick as we close. Why is this an art? Well, the art of it is because our clients come to us from so many different places. And this is sort of a color graph for emotions, for attachment and emotions. For some, our clients have so much emotion, and they're coming to us in the red. And our job is to help regulate them, and to sort of create words for the anger and the angst and the frustration. And that's sort of the hot-tempered, the angry, the frustrated. And so we have to focus on, okay, this person's coming in with a lot of emotion. Let's help deregulate them. But then we have some people who live in their life in the blue, and we would consider them thinkers, and maybe their emotions aren't as accessible to them. And so we almost think that empathy is not really relevant to them. If they came to us and they're all thought process, a lot of times we sort of just go through and talk facts, and then we hang up the phone, or we get out of a session, or we walk away from a conversation, and we say, oh, that was easy. It was just all thoughts. But the problem is that for some of these people, they were never given the freedom to feel, the permission to feel. And so sometimes we have to elicit emotions with people who are shut down, to say, wow, that's hard. I wonder if you're feeling angry or jealous, or you feel upset about that. And they're like, no. And then you say, are you sure? Like, is it possible that maybe there are some feelings there that you just haven't been able to express? Because we have to remember that the way that this works is that our limbic system, and if one is overpowering the other, then we're not really in a healthy place, that they both have to be sort of in harmony. And so with empathy, we always think of the angry client, but really empathy also goes to our detached client. Like, to say, what emotions are they feeling, and to almost be the voice that they didn't have, and to express the emotions maybe that they weren't able to voice, or they weren't allowed to talk about when they were kids because it was too unsafe a thing. Our clients live on both spectrums here, and we have to understand, and that's why it's the art. I can tell you the skills, but the art is figuring out where your client's at, and matching them, and meeting them where they're at, and being able to do it in a way that if you're talking to someone who is very logical and is getting stuck in their thoughts, that you also recognize there's a role of emotion here that they're not experiencing. And you can't address that person the same way as the person who's coming in angry, hot-tempered, and frustrated. And so the art is to truly attune ourselves to the different thought process, but also emotions that are associated with the person who's sitting in front of us. And that takes years to master. That is a lifelong process of figuring out of, oh my gosh, I missed this or I missed that. How do I do that? At the end of the day, this recreating the secure base is really what we're doing. We're literally being the parent. There's tons of information out there about how there's almost like this transference and countertransference that's occurring, that in some ways the counseling, therapeutic, empathetic relationship is a healing opportunity to overcome maybe some of the things that our parents or the parents who are the people who are with maybe didn't provide to them. That in some ways we are recreating an instinctual, deep in our roots, part of our neurology need to come to someone and say, I need help. I can't do this on my own. I don't know what to do. And no one comes humbly to do that. They come at us angry and frustrated and scared. And they come at us with almost this mess of emotions. And they literally say to us, can you help regulate me? Can you help regulate this? Can I literally throw up on you and know that you're going to securely be able to handle me and love me and care for me, even though what I'm about to do is going to be vulnerable, it's going to be gross, it's going to be nasty, there may be things I say that are inappropriate. Like, can you manage me? And we, the person who is sitting there as a secure base, have to say, yes, I will scoop you up. I will be here as we manage these ridiculous emotions from things that maybe you had no control over, or trauma that occurred to you at such a young age that we can't even make sense of. But we will do this together, that I will be here for you and I will scoop you up and we will talk about it and you can share it, and there will be containment of emotions and conversations, and I will not put you in a position where if something doesn't make sense to me or if I don't agree with it, where I shame you. I'm going to create the secure base for you to come and, in a sense, come as you are, not the way I want you to be, but as you are. It's an old Christian hymn. It's also a Nirvana song, right? Like, come as you are. Like, you bring this to me and I will provide the secure base for you to say, hey, I get it. Like, this is hard. This is tough. This is, the emotions, like, I'm here with you. I sense this pain. That's a horrible situation that you're in. Wow, I don't have this simple answer to this, but I got you. I'm going to be here with you. And that's like the recipe for our neurology, is knowing that we're not alone, is knowing that we have someone there who can help manage us, that can help manage all this garbage that we call life and how to do it. And what it really is, in some ways, is it's like the sanctity of connection. This is God's work, if you think about it. Like, this, what we are doing with empathy is we're creating an environment that is like creating the safe place of like mercy and grace to come and say, like, I don't need you. I don't want to see the you that you want other people to see. Like, I'm here for the real you. And even though that real you is scared because you're afraid that it's shameful what you're about to share, or it's dirty or gross, or it doesn't make sense, like, we can do this, and I will be here for you. And as we unpack this stuff, we will walk through this together. And whatever it means, like, I'm here for you. And when a person experiences that security, that safe base, it changes everything. Because now they say, someone really knows me. I mean, really knows me. And they're okay with me. Now, I know that the things that I'm going through aren't the best, or maybe the things I'm doing aren't the most effective. But before we address that of like how to do it differently, how to do it better, how to work through some of the things that aren't working for me, I feel so safe right now. Like, that's powerful. And that's what you're giving people with this empathy thing. You're literally doing God's work. It's the way that God accepted me when I came to him and I'm like, and he's like, I got you. And it's the way that I now have to try to parent my kids when they come to me with whatever it is. And I fail at this all the time. And I say, I got you. Let's do this together. We can work through this. The process, the emotions, I will help regulate you through this process. And then it's now what I get to give back to my clients. It's a powerful experience for those of you who've experienced it. It's also so powerful for those of us who have given it to others. So, okay, I went over 7 minutes. I'm so sorry. I apologize. So Ashley, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Bill. If you have questions or comments for Bill, please raise your hand or put the questions in the chat. We do have one question for you, Bill, from Sergio. He was wondering, can you recommend reading material or sites that can help us practice these skills?
Yeah, I like The Permission to Feel, I think, is a really great book. So The Permission to Feel is something I recommend. Anything else about Brene Brown stuff on empathy is awesome. You know, those are some of the Permission to Feel, yeah, perfect. So it's really, really cool stuff. So, and like I said, just look up reflection of content, reflection of feeling. I love doing YouTube and just watching people do it and see how they do it. It's really cool stuff. Obviously, Carl Rogers was the creator of this, person-centered therapy, unconditional positive response. So there's a ton of stuff out there that can be helpful to you guys. So.
Great. We also just had some comments for you, powerful, and someone said, awesome, I needed to hear this. Thank you so much. Love this.